One day, the American author Alexander Woollcott was having dinner in a London restaurant with his friend, the famous English writer G.K. Chesterton. As educated people often do, they were discussing philosophical questions. The question came up, what is the difference between power and authority? Chesterton said, if a rhinoceros were to walk into this restaurant right now, he certainly would have power here, but I would be the first one to get up and assure him that he has absolutely no authority. Power and authority are two entirely different things. What is authority? Well, the word comes from author. An author, as we know, is someone who writes something, someone who creates something. Someone who writes the book is the expert. As we say, she wrote the book. That is to say, she knows everything about the subject. She is an authority. We see Jesus teaching the people. They were amazed that he was teaching with authority and not like their own religious leaders. The religious leaders had a lot of power, but they had no real authority. Jesus, on the other hand, had written the book. He was the author. He had the authority. He drove out the unclean spirits, and they obeyed him because they too felt his authority. Jesus had access to all the power in heaven and on earth. He never grasped at that power, but chose to act with authority instead. When he was on the cross, the thief crucified next to him said, "If you are the Christ, come down from this cross with your power and save yourself and us." Jesus, who could have done that, did not. When Jesus was tempted in the desert, he was tempted to reach for power, but he refused, choosing instead to embrace a life of authentic authority. Not only the crowds, not only the unclean spirits, but even the winds and the sea recognized his authority and obeyed it. We see so many people grasping for power and basing their lives on power. Among the lesser-known atrocities of Hitler's Third Reich was a plan to take over all the churches in Germany under one national Reich-Church. In the 30 points composed by Rosenberg, the Nazi philosopher, it was envisioned that the Bible would be prohibited, and in its place would stand on every altar a copy of Hitler's Mein Kampf. All crucifixes and crosses would be ripped down from the churches, and in their place would be a swastika. Hitler certainly had the power to do all this. He had many armed, uniformed people around him to enforce his will by terror. He had plenty of power, but he had no authority to meddle in the things of God. When in September of 1939 Hitler invaded Poland, thus beginning the Second World War, he certainly had the power to do it. He had the troops to do it, but he had no authority to do it. When he ordered the annihilation of countless human beings, Jewish people, Slavic people, priests and nuns, gay people, handicapped people, gypsies, and so many others he considered undesirable, he certainly had the power to accomplish it, but had no authority, neither from heaven nor from earth. There is a huge difference between power and authority. If you are visiting a foreign country and a policeman stops you, you had better stop because you see his gun. He certainly has power. You might not be sure how much authority he really has, but the power will stop you. What is authority? In the 20th century, there was a well-known saint known to us as Mother Teresa. In 1952, this little Albanian nun started a house in Calcutta for the poorest of the poor, a house for dying people. The Hindu priests down the street were very upset that these Catholic nuns were moving in on their territory, and they tried to persuade the government to expel Mother Teresa and her sisters. But then one of the Hindu priests fell terribly ill with tuberculosis. Since it was untreatable, he was not admitted to any of the hospitals. Mother Teresa went to the dying man, took him into her house, and cared for that Hindu priest herself until the day he died. Then she and her sisters carried his body back to his own temple to receive the full Hindu rites. So it was that Mother Teresa began to be recognized as a person with authority, simply because she had no other agenda than selfless love. So complete was this recognition that she was able to accomplish the incredible. In August of 1982, after the Israeli army had invaded Lebanon and Beirut was under siege, Mother Teresa heard about 37 children caught in the crossfire without food or water in a hospital right there on the front lines. Mother Teresa said she was going to rescue those children. All the diplomats and bishops told her she could not go into that section of town in the midst of the shooting. She said, "I will call a ceasefire." And this tiny 72-year-old nun walked through the machine gun fire, walked through the bombs, and by her presence immediately effected a ceasefire. One by one, she pulled out the 37 frightened Muslim children trapped in that hospital and brought them all to safety. Mother Teresa had no power. I saw her once. She was a little bit of a thing, a wisp of a creature, 4 feet 11 inches tall, skinny as a rail, with no physical power. She had no armed policemen or soldiers around her. She had no political power, belonged to no political party. But that woman had authority. Where did her authority come from? Her authority came from a life of selfless love. She had gained the respect, earned that authority, and so was able to drive out demons no less than Jesus was. She had united herself to the Christ who did not grasp for power, but who spoke with the authority of one known for his selfless love. Power or authority? The church speaks with authority when the church unites itself to the Lord of selfless love. Then people listen. Throughout history, the church has made many blunders when it has tried to grasp for power instead of authentic authority. We need only to think of the terrible chapters of the Crusades, the Inquisition, the persecutions, and the religious wars. Even when they seemed to win, in the long run they lost. We as individuals, we as church, we as teachers act in a credible way only when we act with authentic authority rather than power, only when we embrace the Christ of selfless love. Then and only then are our voices heard. Then it is that we too are able to calm storms, the storms we find so often in our lives and in the lives of others. Then it is that we too are able to cast out unclean spirits. When we speak and act with the authority of selfless love, we are able to cast out the unclean spirit of fear, which prevents us from loving. When we act with this authentic authority, we are able to cast out the unclean spirit of despair, which prevents us from living. When we act with authority, we are able to cast out the unclean spirit of hatred, which tears our world asunder. As teachers, as individuals, as church, let us never grasp for power, but let us rather grasp the hand of the Christ who emptied himself of power, making himself the servant of all, and so was able to speak with real authority. Let us too speak, act, live, and teach with authority, and so calm the storms, cast out the unclean spirits, and transform the world.